Underground Utility Assessment District public meeting. It's October 29th, and we'll be taping this session for those in the public who are unable to attend today and would like to keep up with the information on the project. So I'd like to welcome you all, and I'd like to introduce our staff. We have Jim Britch from Facilities Management. He's our consultant. He's our underground utility coordinator. We have Lisa Arroyo, project engineer for the staff. And we have in the audience, we have Tom Wagner, who's the Southern California Edison planner. So thank you for coming. And wanted to give you an update on the project. Here's our agenda for the evening, that we'd like to give you a current project status, an update, and then our preliminary design update. The last time that we met, we were looking at draft Edison design issues, but we didn't have the Cox and Verizon designs, and now we have that completed Cox and Verizon design. I apologize that it's taken us this long to get back to a public meeting. As you know, we've been significantly impacted by the T-Fire and the Hezecita fire, and not only us with the city, but the utility companies. As you know, that they've done some heroic work in restoring utilities and responding to the utility outages during those fires, and they've been consumed and swamped with their work, and it's been difficult for them to get back into design work associated with this project. And so I apologize for the delay, but we've been trying to move this now forward in response to due diligence and trying to pick up where we left off prior to the fires. So after we look at, and that's the primary reason for our meeting today, is to go over our utility design, because it's now a draft final utility design. We'll be talking today about locations of structures and field issues, and so your input from those that are here today and those that are viewing this from home, your input is very important to us so that we can work towards a final design. Once we complete a final design, or actually even after a couple weeks after this meeting, we would like to work with our assessment engineer to work towards her assessment engineer's report. And then we can meet again and talk about assessment projections and issues associated with the assessment engineer's report. So today we have a preliminary project cost estimate to inform you of, and then we'll give you a little bit more information on our assessment engineering update. I've just touched on it a little bit now. We'll talk a little bit more. Then we'll take your comments and questions and talk about next steps. So with that, move forward with our project status. For those that maybe it's been a while, I just want to do a real brief background and overview, which in May of 2007 is when our City Council approved the initiation of the Underground Utility Assessment District. It's a while now, and there was a boundary, and we'll look at the boundary in a minute, that was taken to Council at that time based on the petition that was submitted to Council. And so we've had some modifications to that boundary based on assessment issues, assessment engineering issues. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So just a reminder that the city is facilitating the Underground Utility Assessment District process. And by that, we've learned through the previous UUAD at Farello Road that it is extremely important for us to hear from all residents and all those interested in the program, and that the desire of the city is to deliver what the neighborhood wants. And so we will be listening to all the proponents, all the people who have concerns and may not like to be in a UUAD. It's very doubtful that we'll ever receive consensus on that. But what we're striving for is that we work in harmony with the neighborhood and have the neighbors work in harmony, so that if we can do things that can facilitate that, we're willing to go the extra mile to do that. So please know that we would like to work with your neighborhood. We'll come to individual meetings or group meetings to help discuss issues, but if it gets to the point where we need to discuss things of significance, then we'd like to call a general public meeting for the neighborhood so we can get those issues on the table above board and put them all, address them appropriately. So we are the facilitator. We'd like to deliver what the neighborhood would like to have. But we've gone to City Council, and the Council has indicated to us that they would like to see a strong level of support to enable them to be able to approve an underground utility assessment district. So I just want to reiterate those things to you because those are really important issues, and we're working towards getting this project to a point where it will be a decision of the neighborhood if we move forward or not. And I'll get into some more of those details as we go along. So we're the facilitator. We want to talk to you today about some streetlight modifications or issues. And we have at the corner of Alston and Eucalyptus Hill Road, we have a new streetlight that is being proposed. There's an existing streetlight on an wooden Edison pole that will be removed if the project moves forward, and that would need to be replaced. We're also going to talk about in the design how there's a 6.6 amp circuit in this district that would either need to be connected to or converted to a conventional voltage for streetlights. The 6.6 amp system is a outdated system. There are pockets of it that exist. It just so happens it's in the Eucalyptus neighborhood. And we also had a similar instance of it in our underground utility district on Cliff Drive, which is under construction. We had the similar instance in which we would have needed to either connect to the system or convert that system. We found through competitive bidding that was actually cheaper to convert the system using the existing wires than to actually connect to it, which means adding a whole bunch of expensive equipment to do that. And another reason to make the conversion is that it's a safety issue. There's a limited amount of people that are licensed and capable of working on that system, and there's a city goal to replace that outdated system. And so we have a stretch of that, and so the good news, I think, for the neighborhood is that it's actually, we found that in bidding this last project that it's cheaper to convert that system than to just simply connect to it. And then we want to talk about an updated boundary issues as some of the discussions that we've had with our assessment engineer. All right, so this is from the last meeting, and we've had public meetings on November 2007, and then in May of 2008. And this was the boundary that we showed the neighborhood the last time that we met. And the black line represents the boundary that was taken to the council on May of 2007, and that's the petition that was submitted, based on the petition that was submitted to the council. Now, the red lines, as you may know, are as a result of the assessment engineer being hired and determining that, in her opinion, that these three properties shown here with the arrow, they would likely need, in her opinion, need to be included in the boundaries as they are receiving a benefit to the project. And then similarly, we talked about these two properties down by Cedar Lane that may be included if this pole, and we've called it pole A, was to be removed. And in subsequent meetings, we've determined that in this current design that we currently have, that pole is in the design scheduled to remain, and that would mean that these two properties would not be part of the assessment district. Now, this property, reading the address, this property, 100 Alston? Thank you. 100 Alston would also drop out of the boundary if the assessment engineer, and she's leaning towards determining that it doesn't have the benefit. Similarly, that we would add in the benefit received by the property here. And so that was the status of the boundary the last time we met. Now, in continuing to work on the project and on the issues, the updated boundary, as of today, you see the three properties that remain up top. Those are still remain to be in, and these two are remain to be out and in. Then there's another property that has the potential to be out of the district, and it's involving their overhead service line. The fact that it has two streets to front, that there's the potential for this this property to either be in or out of the boundary, and we're working on those issues. So I just want to make you aware of the potential of these boundary changes. And the next time that we meet, one of our goals is to have assessment engineer's report update with the assessment engineer here present. We talk about these assessment issues. But today's meeting, we're focusing on the utility design. Okay, just want to make you aware of potential boundary changes, and again, they're directly related to the assessment engineer's report. Okay, moving on to streetlights. As I mentioned, at the corner of Alston and Eucalyptus, there's an existing wooden pole with a cobra head attachment to the streetlight, and that will, if the project is approved and moved forward, then it would be removed as part of the undergrounding and removal of the overhead system and would need a replacement. It's at an intersection, and therefore there's a need to have it replaced to illuminate the intersection for both vehicular and pedestrian crossing issues, as is the standard in the city. The other streetlights that are shown, those are Marble-Light or concrete poles with the existing cobra head streetlights, and they would remain. They would remain as is. So what we're talking about is the need to replace a light that would be coming down if the overhead utility system came down. And to let you know what the replacement style is likely, and this is subject to the review and approval of, I believe, the ABR's jurisdiction here, the new Domus style. It's an efficient light that has a cutoff lens in it that disseminates the light downward, as opposed to some of the, or as opposed to the cobra head style, which has a side illumination feature that we're trying to have that light go downward and minimize any light pollution and have more efficient lighting on the street. And so that's what's proposed. And then again, it's subject to the approval of the ABR. And again, this conversion of the 6.6 amp circuitry is in the area that's shown in the green circle here. And that is the area that we have to address this issue of the difference between a conventional amperage or wattage lighting system and this antiquated 6.6 amp system. So as the good news, as I've mentioned, is that we've learned through the bidding process that it was cheaper on Cliff Drive project to utilize the existing wire and convert the circuitry as opposed to connect to it. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Jim Britch to let you know about the features of the design. And I offer you to come to the back of the table here if you'd like, so that Jim can make his way through the utility design features.
Okay. Let's see. And okay, and okay. Well, we're gonna wait for just a minute till we convert to that sheet, but I will allow you to follow on that. We have to convert the input to that sheet, and then we'll have to focus down. I want you to look though first. We've got this area here, right below all these hills. These houses are on hills, the hill above Eucalyptus Hill Road, and so their view plane is out in this direction. It's pretty steep. They do not see much of the street. So when we're locating our meter pedestals, and in this case, this represents the meter pedestal that would allow the electricity used by the streetlights across the way here, allow them to be metered and charged. That streetlight pedestal is being set down there. Again, it's above Deer Path and below these residents, so that it would be the least amount of view or aesthetic infringement possible. As you know, you've got there's a parking area here alongside Eucalyptus Road, an area where people can park. So what we intend to do is consolidate all the equipment that has to be above ground right there, and then probably put a couple bollards around it to protect it, maybe take up half of one of those parking spaces. I know parking is at a real premium there. So, and I can show you what this particular meter pedestal looks like, as it's a streetlight pedestal. It looks like this. And essentially the electricity comes out of the underground, it comes up into this meter, it has a disconnect here, etc. And then the person that charges, when they charge this electricity, the city pays its electrical bill. the meter reader just can read it through this window. And if the electricians need to come out and work on the streetlights, they can go to this meter pedestal and disconnect it, disconnect the streetlights so they can work safely. Okay? The streetlights that are being fed by this across the way that we've talked about, the ones that are currently there, for you there would be really no change to the streetlights in this area. They'll look just the same, except they'll be run by the electricity to them, instead of being supplied by this 6.6 circuit that comes clear over here from Barker Pass. These streetlights would be fed from that meter pedestal. So that's one piece of equipment that's being located there. It's the only thing that you would see different in that area as we change those streetlights over. Okay. With that, I want to go on to this view here, which is I believe our Cox above ground equipment. And I'd like to mention to the neighborhood that the reason that we have to review these designs with you, and remember when Mr. Wagner first presented his SCE design, we had everybody take a look at that. There were some questions. Can we do this? Can we do that? A couple of individual property owners actually wanted the connection point for their property moved. And Tom was, there's certain things that he can change and certain things he cannot change. And when a property owner or the neighborhood makes a request to have something moved or relocated or modified in some slight way, he will work, he has worked with you in the past to do that. So once we got over that initial hurdle, if you will, of sorting out the Southern California electric design, Tom passed his design over to the Cox and Verizon people, and then they looked at it from the same perspective, and again, with an emphasis on minimizing any above-ground equipment that they would have to install. An emphasis on that, and then also putting the outlets or the demarcation points, the connection points for the Cox and Verizon equipment, where in other words you would connect to that, right next to or as close to as possible the Southern California Edison connection point, so that property owners converting to underground would only have to put one trench on their property, and they could put all the conduits for the connection into that trench. So I'm going to look at this, and then I'll come over to that map in just a moment, but I want you to notice this pedestal right here is a little bit larger. That's why Lisa has made this a larger star than these two. These two pedestals, and I think we can go to the next slide, John. The two pedestals up there are these Cox cable TV or cable TV pedestals. They'll look just like that. They're very, very innocuous. And when the technicians come out to work on this, they just pick this lid off the top of this, and then they can get all their equipment within this. In working with the Cox planner, there is a possibility that this large pedestal would have to be located. And when I say large, notice it's only 48 inches high by 30 inches by 18. It's not that obtrusive. It would sit next to the streetlight pedestal that you saw previously in that same area. It's possible that that would be located in that location where the parking area now exists on the portion of Eucalyptus Hill Road to the east of Alston Road. But Mr. Schwartzberg, the Cox designer, has told me that as he gets to the final design, he will attempt to replace this larger piece of equipment with a smaller piece, and feels that there's maybe a 50-50 opportunity for him to be able to do that. So the point here more than anything is for you to understand the amount of effort and work that the Cox and Verizon planners put into this, minimizing any above-ground equipment for the neighborhood. Because we understand that the more we can get out of the visual view plane, the more likely, the more suitable it's going to be for the neighborhood, and the more coordinated that's going to be with the goals of the neighborhood. I might also mention that Mr. Wagner, in his SCE designs, when plausible, put in vaults to put his equipment underground as opposed to putting it above ground. But in some cases, you simply can't do that. So, John, can we go back to the other map? Oh, this is the, thank you, this is the SCE above ground equipment, and we've looked at this at the last meeting. This, I believe, is a vault, and then the stars here are a couple pieces of above ground equipment, transformer equipment that, again, Edison has to have above ground. They have a lot of problems when they put this stuff in the ground, in vaults. If it's just a small piece of equipment, it's pretty costly to put that in the ground. And when they do put the vaults in the ground, you can see this would be the access to a vault here in the street. And then they have to have these air ventilation holes on the side also, which are you know, a little bit visually intrusive or visually, at least they're there, you see them. But most of the SCE equipment that we're representing with those smaller stars is in, it looks like this. And you can, you know, we can landscape around this, we can disguise this in a number of different ways. So it's very low, it's not huge above ground equipment that we would be dealing with. Then the two vaults are here and here, and then those smaller, what we call pad mount transformers, are in these other areas with the other stars. Another good news for the neighborhood is that when we look at the Verizon design, and let's see if we may not even have a slide of that because I'm going to show it on this drawing over here. But the Verizon design, they were able to put all of their equipment underground, which we were really happy with. They worked diligently to do that. We're working with a designer out there, a planner out there named Chris Hakey. And Chris worked on this and came up with a plan that he could have all the above-ground equipment required for his system outside of the neighborhood. So in that regard, anything that Verizon puts in, we will not see, you will not notice it. It will be, I suppose you could say you would notice it because it'll be a little, a in-ground handhold, if you will. It's a handhold is like a connection point where literally a technician can raise the lid and get in there and work with his hands to connect and disconnect cabling. But that will all be below ground. So with that, I want to step over to the map that is on the table and see if I can get Lisa to switch the input for the television viewers. And I just want to give you a run through. This is, we can bring this down, and as we focus it, it becomes much more clear. Yeah, I should be good with this. A challenge for the Verizon people also was that the Barker Pass Road, and where Barker Pass intersects with Eucalyptus Hill Road down here, I guess this will show up. Okay. In this area here, a lot of the circuits that come up here actually go out of the Chapala Street central office. So people living over here have a different prefix to their phone numbers, okay? This area, the area you live in, you all have this Montecito prefix. And that's a very desirable prefix. And so Verizon has worked very diligently to keep everybody in their existing telephone prefix. So that you would not have to change phone numbers, okay? There isn't a situation with this gentleman at 1840 Barker Pass Road. He has asked if he could convert or move his electrical feed. He feeds currently, his electrical feed and his telephone feed come from Eucalyptus Hill Road. And he's asked if he can convert that, if he can move that over and be fed from Barker Pass Road and then be left out of the UUAD. He's asking if that's an option for him. I'm working with Mr. Wagner to determine what would be required. He's currently fed his Cox cable from Barker Pass Road. But that is a situation where one of the ramifications of that change would be that he would have to change his phone number because currently he's in the Montecito Exchange and he would have to go into the Santa Barbara Exchange. So that'll be part of his decision-making process with this. I'm going to start then on the westerly end of the project in this area here. This is the large vault that Edison will be putting in, and it's right adjacent to Cedar Lane. Remember, all of these circuits that feed the electricity to this neighborhood come up Cedar Lane and then are dispersed along this area. So that would be the transitional vault with that. That would allow the pole that's located at that intersection, it will remain, but we would transition to underground, and then you can see the underground trench will feed that electricity underground around the corner and over across the bridge to this area here. If you recall, and again, I know that you probably see the poles, but we oftentimes don't understand exactly what they're doing. But currently, that circuit is fed cross-country, if you will, from here in a pole line that comes across and then swings down like this. And that's part of the poles that we're going to be eliminating. So in this area here, we would come with the undergrounding down across the bridge. We would have a couple of mounts here. Notice also it's a Verizon pull box and a Cox pull box. No above-ground equipment, really, just places where we can make these connections. We're coming across to this area, and then each one of these little lines that we see there shows where the property would be connected to. In other words, so when you see the T, it is a pole box or a handhold that the underground for this house, should the project proceed, they would underground to that handhold, and then that's where their conduits would meet the project conduits. Okay? We're going to go underground down here, and then instead of crossing the street in numerous places, we also have a little underground run over on this side. Okay? A couple, again, SCE pull boxes or handholds along the way. We come down to this point, and we see this is a Cox pedestal, the brown mark with the X on it there. Thank you. That's actually a Cox pedestal, and that's one of those little low green pedestals that we showed you in the picture before. There's several pieces of equipment across the street, but again, it's all below ground. It's all pole boxes. So that's really the first place that we're going to see something above ground is right there. And then we're proceeding down to this break-off with Alston Road and Eucalyptus Hill Road that proceeds this way. And we notice here that we've got a large vault in the street that will allow us to make this changeover. And then we've got a couple pedestals here that we've talked about. I know the property owners at 1885 have worked with Edison on that. Yes. Well, I know they've talked to Edison and asked if there's any way that can be modified or changed, but it's, unfortunately those pieces of equipment are going to have to set there because we've got so much equipment that currently comes into this pole across the street that we're removing.
Is there a possibility, let me know if I'm...
Go ahead, yeah.
Maybe putting these boxes near the property line.
I see. Again, could you restate that?
No, my question was, why we would like to see the undergrounding go forward is that we hope that the benefit to our property will exceed the assessment. So if we're going to be spending all this money for a benefit, I'm beginning to question how much benefit I'm going to have by having a couple large green boxes, plus this vault, which is actually on my property, because I own a part of the street here that is where the parking is. So, I'm trading my view of the ocean, if you will, for what everybody else is going to see when they look at the house.
I see. I understand, and I'll tell you, I appreciate that. I think that's a realistic concern. I'm going to let Tom Wagner address that maybe a little later on. And Tom has been able to join us tonight, so that's maybe something that he can speak to. If you look at this dividing point right here at Alston Road and Eucalyptus Hill Road, you'll note that we proceed across the street to Alston Road and then down Alston Road to this corner. Now, the streetlight is shown right here, and that streetlight will be replaced. It's on a wood pole now, and you'll see this much less obtrusive domus fixture that, again, has this downlighting. So we won't have a situation with that light radiating up the hills or, this light pollution. So we'll have that domus fixture installed there, and then this whole pole maze will come down. These two poles are here, and we had talked about how could we gracefully treat this pole. This had been a question that the neighborhood had addressed in the past, and the solution is to come all the way or as far down Alston Road as we can, approaching Alston Place before we transition up. And that gets as opposed to just moving that pole 50 feet or 70 feet or 100 feet, the conclusion was to come all the way down to the intersection there, and that's where the district would end and the pole would go up. And that, of course, will be a partial benefit to 207 Alston Road because they'll have some of this clutter cleared out of this way. And, of course, all these properties up here will have this view perspective opened up to them. So, again, Mr. Wagner had that was in response to neighborhood comments. That's not how he had originally designed it, but after listening to the neighborhood at the last meeting, that's changes that he's been able to make that accommodate the neighborhood's desires. If we look then how we proceed down Eucalyptus Hill Road going east towards Montecito, we have this road that runs up here. We have a pole line that currently runs up next to 1895. That pole line carries the electricity that converts to underground at this point and then goes easterly down this above this property line to feed all these houses downhill and to feed the houses uphill from there. And this has been a very important pole for us to get out. This area here has been it's been very important. There's no sense if we're taking these poles down, you see, There's no sense undergrounding up and then leaving that one pole standing. It's, if we take this pole down, we have nothing to attach to. So, of course, we have to underground up this road. Okay, we will intercept a current underground box that exists there and simply route into it to backfeed 1895 and to supply electrical and communication services to the properties above, and again to reconnect all these properties down here to the circuit that's currently underground but is fed by that overhead line. So that's pretty straightforward. And again, you can see down here we have several pull boxes that will interface that with. But again, no above-ground equipment in that area. At that point, we're going to cross the street because it'll be much easier to work on the lower side or the southerly side of Eucalyptus Hill Road, and we'll have that parking area so we can have much less obstruction to traffic, much more area to work in. And we will proceed, again, easterly on Eucalyptus Hill Road towards Montecito, which each one of these purple stub outs that you see, these little T's, will be replacing that overhead circuit and will allow the people on Deer Path then, that will be their connection point. Currently there are overhead wires running down there. There's a pole that sets down here that feeds a couple houses. I think it comes down like this and feeds these two houses. All that would be removed. All that would be removed, and the new connection point would be up here in this area. And again, what we have done with this is we've located that in such a way that we could consolidate, for example, on this property line, all of the utilities in a single area and then Y out to feed the two houses. Again, nothing above ground there until we get down to this point. And this is where we have a pole line that runs between 1944 Eucalyptus Hill Road and 861 Deer Path Road. And what that pole line does is it comes down the hill and then it feeds 861. It goes down and connects to an underground box that runs over to 871 Deer Path Road. And that, of course, would all be undergrounded, and we would have other connection points. We'd do an intercept here to an existing underground. We'd have an intercept point there or a demarcation point where this residence, 861 Deer Path, could connect to. And this whole pole line would come down. We will have in this area, again, a couple pieces of above-ground equipment. We'll have a SCE pad-mounted transformer, one of the low green pad transformers, the smaller piece of equipment that was represented by Edison, a handhole, and then the brown box here with the X in it is representative of that taller Cox Communications box that I said Mr. Schwartzberg is working. He's hopeful, but he can't commit to it yet, that could be a smaller box. But again, we like to present the worst case scenario. We'd hate to tell you that it's going to be the small low box and later on have to come back with the tall box. So right now it's designed for the taller box, but again, there's a possibility that would change. And then we would try to also locate our electrical meter pedestal somewhere in that area so we could consolidate that equipment and minimize the impact on the parking area here. Okay? And then finally we would simply proceed down. Again, this is the underground circuit as it comes down, feeding 1950 Eucalyptus Hill Road. Again, this is all below ground equipment. So the view plane as we came into this corner would be, there'd be nothing above ground. And obviously then we would proceed up Eucalyptus Hill Road to the last pole. And at that point, again, just several pole boxes. And remember what these pole boxes or handholds are again, places where technicians can get down into the ground and make and unmake connections to make the system work. So what we're interested in from the neighborhood, again, is we believe we've had a lot of input with the Cox and Verizon design, with the SCE design. An example of that would be, if I can go back to this area, an example of that would be this property at 1889 Eucalyptus Hill Road. They were originally going to have to connect down here, and the the property owner talked to Mr. Wagner, and he was able to move that connection point. Since we have a trench open up this road, we're going to move that connection point up to this point, making a shorter distance for them to connect. And of course, doing that with the Edison, then it only makes sense to do that with Cox and Verizon also. So those are the kinds of changes we can make, or that the utility planners can make with neighborhood input. So if we have any situation with people viewing this on TV either tonight, or excuse me, that will be viewing it on TV on our website, looking at this meeting later on, and they have any questions about or concerns about where their connection points are located, we need to hear from you because, again, these are preliminary designs we're bringing to the neighborhood for your approval and acceptance. And if there's something, as with this point brought up on these boxes here, that we can maybe move those to a property line or do something of that sort that would be more along the lines of what the property owners and neighbors, we certainly want to hear that. This is not to a large extent, it's not a take it or leave it situation. It's like, here's our best effort. Is there any way that you can see that we would improve this?
Can I ask you a question about that last topic?
Certainly.
You're talking about running up through this, which is a concrete driveway between our house at 1895 and here, up to Ms. Brower's. This is the connection point here that you just mentioned. Are they thinking of undergrounding on the east side of that concrete driveway and then crossing through the concrete driveway to service Ms. Schwartz's property, or are they going to come through the west side of the driveway so that they don't have to trench across the driveway at the point where they're servicing Naomi's property?
Well, that's a very good point, very good question. Let me tell you why it was planned this way. The boxes above the 1895 property are all on this side of the driveway. And so at some point we've got to cross the road. When we cross the road here, because we're not carrying the primary circuits up the driveway, the trenching for those primary circuits will be much more significant than this one little trench to go across to carry the individual service. So we could have trenched on this side of the road, on what we'll call it the westerly side, but at that point we'd have to make a bigger cut across the driveway at the top to come across and connect. So the reason that at some point we've got to cross the road to get to this box or to this service point, and we designed it, or the planners designed it in such a way that we would have minimal impact and repair on that concrete driveway when we crossed.
So it'll trench on the eastern side in the dirt as opposed to disturbing the concrete. The only place it'll have to disturb the concrete is where it crosses Naomi's.
That would be the desire. We'd hope to do that. We'd hope to do that, and
Without electricity?
we would hope to do that. We would hope to do that, in other words, to whenever we can, to trench in the dirt. We have to stay in the public right-of-way because, remember, otherwise we'd have to go to this property owner and ask for an easement, because we're running utilities across their property to serve their neighbors. We're trying to avoid that, so that's part of what the survey did, is we wanted to make sure that we stayed as much as possible in the public right-of-way. And
Public right-of-way? I don't think so. I think that's a private.
Driveway.
is it a private driveway? Okay, so then we'd have to get an easement for that. But again,
The
Yeah.
part where this would be dug on the
That's
in
our
the earth,
property.
that's our property.
Okay.
You can have it.
and there is room in the.
I'm off.
slight
Watch
fee.
out for the killer dog.
I
Let's just do it.
I apologize. I'm not intricately. I know that the hill drops down to that a little bit, and so what we would do is we obviously we put the trench there. We'd want to do it in such a way that we didn't erode or damage the landscaping in such a way that would cause further erosion. But that'd be the sort of thing that we'll look at in the field. And obviously, the contractor's best interest is to do it as inexpensively as he can. And if he can refrain from cutting concrete out and then reinstalling concrete, that's going to be much less expensive, much less work, much less troublesome for him. And that's certainly the way it would be approached. And I'll just comment on something else that you said. I know that you said it a little bit humorously to Mrs. Schwartz about you'll be out of electricity. Remember, when we do all these systems, the underground system is installed completely before any overhead systems are taken down. So in so doing, they install the underground system. They completely energize the underground system with the Verizon, with the Cox, with the Southern California Edison Electricity. And then, and only then, when everything is ready to go, do they make that connection. And so what they do in that situation, and we'll look at this property because it's 1889, it's come out, they would literally at that point, they're ready to go. They have one person, or they have one crew cut loose the overhead wires, and then another crew connects the underground wires. So within a half an hour to an hour, each house is generally cut over. So it's not like, well, you're going to be without electricity for a few days. And I know we said that facetiously, but permanent. Oh, I see, a permanent. Well, we're not going to leave. We're not going to leave any of the residents permanently disconnected. So,
Jim,
yeah.
could I ask, were you
Yes.
were you able to make contact with this property owner
In regard to,
in regard to what is being planned? Where are we here?
this, we're upside down. Your home is here.
Okay. Now, where's Mr. Inks? Here. Okay, I'm sorry. This property owner. Yeah.
Browers is here.
No, Browers is right here.
Browsers. You know,
Did you make any? We talked about this
we did.
last time.
We did, and I haven't. I'll tell you what I need to do. As you know, the property owner there is elderly and difficult to. It's difficult for her to understand exactly what's going on,
Especially by phone.
especially
Yeah.
by phone. And I've visited with her a couple of times and talked to her in the past, but not recently. And what happened, quite frankly, is that Michael gave me a number of her estate attorney, I believe. And I have not been able to make contact with that person, but what I intend to do is actually make contact with them after this meeting,
Okay, that's good.
have them view the meeting, and then go and plan a one-on-one, 15-minute to half-an-hour session with them
Just want to be sure
to explain everything, that she's not left out.
The state attorney office is with me. In fact, I saw her right before I came over here.
Okay,
So
okay.
I'll remind her that if you give me your card, I'll
Have
just
Colbert.
do her tomorrow
Okay,
and
I'll
just ask her to make contact.
I'll certainly do that, Michael. I appreciate that. But yeah, that I appreciate your concern for your neighbor. I think it's very realistic, and that is our job as the facilitators is to make everybody in the neighborhood, to communicate with everybody. And if we have a situation where we have an elderly person that really maybe doesn't understand all the ramifications and all the details, and sometimes simply doesn't want to be bothered with it, even though it's going to have a major effect, then we need to.
A major
Yes.
beneficial effect on her property.
Yes.
That pole comes down.
Yes.
She's not even in the,
Well, it is.
oh, I have
It is.
a new one. I was thinking
Yeah.
glass was the one.
And
Really notice that pole right here that comes down will be us.
Is
Because
that right?
she's high enough above it that and looking
Her view
that
goes
way,
that way.
her view
Yeah.
goes away. The people over here are way up above it. The only view they have is what used to be avocados, now a batting cage, which they put in. So the only people who actually see the difference on that pole is going to be us and you,
Really?
and maybe you.
Yeah, I don't look in
Crane
that
your neck.
direction that often, but.
I was going to point out, I know this person here, and she is very much adamantly opposed to this project for the very reason that just came up, which is they sit so high above that pole, there is zero benefit
Impact
to
to
them.
them.
And so it is really to our disadvantage as a UUAD to incorporate properties that have no visual benefit whatsoever.
Except the pole
So,
sits on her land.
so if the assessment engineer is recommending here that these three be involved because removing this pole is of benefit, it's really to a disadvantage to the whole UUAD because none of these will vote for this project because there's no visual benefit whatsoever to any one of those three.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to defer that discussion to our next meeting when we plan, as John noted, to have the assessment engineer here. And remember, she is, the assessment engineer is the person that draws the property lines, and she can best explain that and discuss that with you as to why that is or is not necessary. So, okay. Oh, and you could also, we could also.
I'd like her number. I'd like to talk with her because
Okay.
the assessment
Here?
engineer
Oh,
that
okay.
incorporated, because this black line was the line of the neighborhood that supported the idea of doing this. She created these three.
And again,
It's not to our
But
benefit.
it looks like they're putting equipment on this property, so they've got to be in the district. Otherwise, they aren't going to put equipment on there. They can't.
well,
There's a right of way. There's got to be a right of way. There's got to be a right of way.
well, again,
If I may just interject, it's the assessment engineer's responsibility to make the determination who is obtaining the benefit. It's a requirement of Proposition 218 that we must abide by the law. And the assessment engineer is an independent party That's their role. And so I hope that we don't get into a debate tonight about that, because we're planning to have that type of discussion at our next meeting. So can we table that? Or I don't mind comments, but we didn't want to have these detailed assessment engineer issues discussed today when the primary purpose of the meeting today is to discuss the utility issues.
When is the next meeting? Because I'd like to see it sooner than a year from now.
I'll talk about that, and that's on the agenda, so we'll talk about that once we wrap up our utility discussion.
So again, in wrapping this up, what I'd just like to say is this is our preliminary design. Again, I appreciate the neighborhood members that are here today that can look at it and see it. And anybody else that has a question on this or any comments or would like to have something considered for a change, you can certainly contact us, and we will arrange to have the utility designer meet with you and discuss that change. And I'm sure, as I've said, they're all very cooperative. And if it's something that can be moved, simply moved or changed or relocated without an impact on the workings of their design, then I'm sure they'd be willing to do that. So,
So I have a question.
okay.
I have 3 questions. So is this the right form to ask? Because it's very specific to our property. And they may be easy.
Okay. Well,
And Mr. Wagner may need to get involved. These 2 boxes, according to the grid, say SCE pad, but they're different in size. So are they actually different in size, or is it my aging eyes, or
Well, they're different.
are they supposed to be different in size?
You know-
Are they really different in size, et cetera?
I believe that one is rotated. I believe that they're a rectangular box and one is simply rotated.
Okay. And what is the size of those boxes?
The let's see.
Because on the slide it didn't indicate. They did on some of them, but not on those SCE pads.
Let's see. I'm not sure that we had the actual dimensions on it, even though we did have a picture of it earlier. So we can. I'll tell you what. We'll come back to that. What was your third question?
My third question is, this is our garage.
Yes.
Our driveway then comes down off the garage. Is this box in the way of our driveway? And if so, is it going to need to be moved, or how does that handle? And then the last question is, we have this parking area in front of our house that's at street level, and the rest of our yard is elevated. So is this in the parking area, or is it in the yard?
Well, I think those are reasonable questions, and since they're oriented towards one specific property in the neighborhood, I'm going to ask that we move on with the meeting and that Tom address those immediately afterwards. That be okay, Tom? Yeah. Okay. What do you think, John? Do you want to since it?
Also a reminder, this is kind of also for illustration purposes, so,
So the box can actually be right here.
well, yeah, I'm not putting it in your living room, no,
Yes,
to little shifting.
You all know Tom Wagner? Mr. Wagner is the planner for Southern California Edison.
Well, thank you, Jim. Essentially, these basically are the same size. They're on a 48-inch by 54-inch pad. One is slightly smaller than the other, but for all intents and purposes, they're the same size.
How big is that box?
The boxes will sit on that pad, and it's about 3 by 3 square by 3.5 feet high. The representation, the picture that you saw, is similar to that. They're all slightly different, different vendors, but the dimensions are pretty accurate.
So they're about 3.5 feet.
Yeah, now your question earlier was if these could be moved. Certainly, we can move it to the corner of the property. That's fine. As I recall, it's been a few months. You have like a retaining wall.
Yeah,
Yes.
the wall is right. See, our fee actually comes down here, like that.
Right.
This is actually our fee here.
You have a little area that's
We have a parking area
a
in-
parking area
right
by
up
the
the
stop
street.
sign. Yeah, and that's where we propose to put the vault.
Can one park on top of the vault?
Certainly. If we have to get in it, of course, we'll try to make contact with you and have the car moved if we need to get in. The only thing I wanted to mention was that, as you recall, you come from a feed across the street to your pole. Then down the pole is a little ground box or handhold that feeds you, and then it feeds the neighbor. It feeds a handhole here, then feeds both of you. So there's a buried handhole at the base of that pole that I couldn't locate. So the transformer you'd have to dig a trench from wherever the transformer is back to the handhole to pick up your 2 homes. Other than that, yeah, you can certainly move it over here. That's not a problem.
That'd be much
Sure.
We don't want to move our driveway.
We don't want you doing that. Okay.
The other questions or comments that were made was this private driveway, and yes, I believe this is a private road. It's not a public right-of-way, so we would have to ask for an easement, the utilities, whoever property this is. I don't know.
It's three properties. It's partly on ours, it's partly on Naomi's, and it's, I believe the stub out, if you will, the extension down to Eucalyptus Hill Road is Brower's.
Okay.
So it covers three different lots.
We would have to ask for an easement, and Jim was right. We would like to trench on earth rather than concrete. And I know you have some ice plant or some sort of planter on one side. And then this is a new box. And then there's a pole here, as you all know. At the base of that pole is a meter panel. And does that serve this house right here, 1895? And then as Jim mentioned, the high voltage comes along the property line and feeds transformers back here to feed these homes, and also feeds a Coronado Circle. And then as part of that system, when they put it in back in the 60s, they ran a low voltage line back here to what's called a service pedestal to pick up this home here, and I believe this home at the corner of, you mentioned an avocado field or something. So it was an avocado field. So this design picks up all of those feeds. Transformer here to come up low voltage to feed 1889, low voltage and high voltage in the same trench to this box to pick up your service and to also pick up the high voltage.
Great. Well, let's see if we can move on. But that's exactly the intent of these meetings, and exactly the intent of the city as a facilitator, is to bring the neighbors and the property owners together with the planners in such a way that we can address concerns just like that and see if something can be worked out that is more conducive to everybody's happiness. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn this back over to Mr. Wozniak.
Thank you, Jim. So I'd like to move on to an update of our assessment engineering issues. And when we sent out the notice 2 weeks ago, we had planned on having the assessment engineer here today and planned to give you a new sheet with some calculations on it to let you know what the latest information was. But just the other day, just this week, we got an interesting discussion with the assessment engineers, and there's some new litigation that is going on right now, and the assessment engineer is working on that and determining how that may impact this underground utility assessment district. And so we have to ensure that we are in compliance with the law, and so this new litigation is what she's investigating, and we'll be looking at our assessment criteria and ensuring that before we give you numbers that we are trying to gain confidence in, that they're as accurate as they can be. And so I'm sorry that it's taking, again, a little longer than everyone hoped, including myself. But we do need to ensure that we are in compliance with the law and that we have the best information available to share with you. And so I don't have a lot of details on the litigation. The question was, can I elaborate on the litigation information? I was told that there was a lawsuit or lawsuits being filed over an assessment district in the state, and that it's in the courts, right, I believe, and that they're looking for, or we are looking for, the advice of our assessment engineer as to how that information then would potentially pertain to this and future underground utility assessment districts. And so it's not in Santa Barbara. This lawsuit that was filed I believe, was not in Santa Barbara, and I believe it may have been in the Bay Area, Piedmont. It has to do with assessment criteria. So what we are doing is she's finding out exactly what that is, how it potentially pertains to us, and then once she has made that determination, then she will then bring the assessment information to us. And so I'm believing that we had intended to come back before the end of the year with an assessment engineer's report update. Now, I'm not sure how long this will take, but I did want to get a little bit of feedback from you today, and even from the people at home who are watching, is that with the upcoming Thanksgiving Day and holiday season and Christmas season, I'm anticipating that what this means is that we may need to then reconvene just after the new year with that issue. Now, if that's problematic, I'd like to hear about that. But in any event, we do need to take the time to ensure that we're giving the best information in compliance with the law. So once I find out how long that is expected to be, then I may have another check-in with the community, but it's difficult for me to say exactly when we will return. And then the challenge here again is, when's the best time to bring that information back to the neighborhood, considering the economy, considering the holiday season. We wanted to have as many people engaged in the issue as we can reach out to and receive. As you know, there's over 30 people in your district, and even today we have a limited representation. So it's important for us to have good, timely, accurate information to the public. So I wanted to let you know of that issue, and so I'm sorry to report that that's going to take the time that is necessary to get the best information back to you. Any questions on that? Okay, I'd like to move on to the next steps. So the next steps in the process is that with the information that we'll receive tonight and in the subsequent information that may come from people watching, then we'd like to go ahead and finalize the design. Now, with that, then the assessment engineer then would take that final design information, apply the assessment criteria to it, and as I mentioned, that's subject to being, I'll say, tweaked at this point. And then what we would do is get out a draft final assessment engineer's report. At that point that we have that draft final assessment engineer's report, we would then have another public meeting, and subsequent public meetings. I'm willing to do as many public meetings as necessary or required for us to have good information, and then we'd like to move forward with the project in accordance with the process. And so what that means is that if we, when the assessment engineer's draft final report is ready, then we would take the pulse of the neighborhood to find out the level of support. And so, as the council has indicated to me, is that they would need a strong level of support to be able to entertain the idea of approving a UUAD. And so, once we take the pulse of the neighborhood, and if, for example, if there was what we believe to be strong support, we would bid the project. We'd get the project out to bid, and we would determine the actual cost. And then the assessment engineer's report would be modified in accordance with not estimated costs, but actual costs. And then it would be put out for the people for a vote. And only then, when the vote is at the time at which that's a final decision that then goes to City Council. And again, City Council has the ability to say yes or no, even if the vote is in favor of moving ahead. So I just want to remind people of that. And that is one of the reasons why that the council has explained that they are looking for a strong level of support. Okay, I missed one step, and that was that we were going to give you an update on the project cost estimate. So with the with the draft final utility design information that we received, we've done an update on our project cost estimate, and we believe it's a very conservative number. And in considering the bid climates now, where a lot of the construction bids are coming in a little bit under the estimates these days because of the competitive nature of the environment. And so our engineer's estimate is $1.1 million. And I see that as a very conservative estimate. I wouldn't be surprised if, I'm using in my head a project cost estimate of approximately $1 million plus or minus 10%. That's the number I've got in my mind. But we have, what's the latest number? 32 properties Easy math tells you that's approximately $30,000 on average, but there's a lot of ways to get to a $30,000 average. As a matter of fact, I believe we've been consistent in informing the neighborhoods that in the Farello Road Underground Assessment District, it was in the $24,000 to $42,000 range, and that, again, is a number that appears consistent. And so what we'll do is we'll give you more accurate information as it becomes available. But as we promised, we just want to give you the best information that we have as it becomes available. And so that's the best information that I have. Please know that I wouldn't be surprised if the ranges are much larger spread in this assessment district than, at least I'm anticipating that, than in the Farello Road, where it was more or less a $24,000 to $42,000 or $48,000 split. Well, I think we could see ranges from 10 to above plus 40 in this neighborhood. So I just want to give you a feel for it, an order of magnitude of it, so that you can think about that. And of course, we'll give you the actual numbers once the assessment engineer's report becomes available. Okay? And if you'd like to view this again online, you can go to our engineering website, and it'll be on www.santabarbaraca.gov/engineering. And we'll mail out this notice to all property owners in the district, so that you'll be, for those who aren't able to be here today, we'll know where to go to view this, and that you could actually see this again if you're interested in viewing portions of it. You can fast forward right to the point you may be interested in seeing. Okay, with that, I open up to any comments and questions, and if you have any, please. Yeah, that's a good one. If you please come to the microphone for the comments and questions. But I see Tom's getting my attention. If you'd like to add something, do you have your mic? Your mic on?
For those people at home.
Do you have your mic on?
People at home that the costs that John gave you do not include your own individual services that we cannot include in the assessment district. So if you want to estimate $30,000 to $35,000 for your lot, you still need to go from the stub out or the cap of the street to your home. So you'll be dealing on an individual basis with the utilities on that. So what you're looking for is your total cost. So you need to add the assessment to your individual property cost to get some sort of total cost for your lot.
But that cost estimate does or does not include contributions by Edison and the city?
The question was, does that cost estimate that Tom just mentioned include, or any of the costs that we've been talking about include the contributions by Edison?
Yes. I can't speak for the other utilities, Cox or Verizon, but for Edison, we've done some preliminary costs, and we don't have a final number, as John said, so we're going to work towards that. But the estimate that John gave you included a preliminary cost that is consistent with what we feel is going to be accurate. So we can't really break it down at this point, but when he mentioned $1 million for the total cost of the assessment, based upon Edison's piece of that, it's pretty much what we think it would be.
All right, but to answer my question, well, my question was then, is that cost to be entirely a home or property owner's cost, or does Edison have a portion of that?
You mean as part of the assessment?
Percentage of that, correct.
Well,
and does the city as well?
Is a certain percentage of the $1 million?
Contribution to the total cost of the project. That was my question.
Yes. What John gave you included the utilities' estimated cost for the job. So what he mentioned was the 3 utilities, Verizon, Cox, and Edison, plus the trenching cost, which is your primary cost, plus, as John mentioned, the city's going to incur costs to convert the streetlight system, which he mentioned in quite a bit of detail. So all those things together roughly equals about $1 million, $1.1 million, based upon the work that they've done and some of the preliminary figures we've given them.
If I may, John, Jim Rich, Tom, could you also speak, I think Mrs. Schwartz's question also, that includes the fact that Edison will remove the poles and pay for the equivalent overhead circuit. I think that's where she was going with that number includes those contributions by Edison as part of the...
Well, I can speak about the Rule 20 process, and maybe you were getting to that, Ms. Schwartz. As part of a 20B, which this falls under, Rule 20 is our undergrounding rules that Edison follows, and there's primarily three different types of undergrounding projects that we have to follow. This is a 20B. A 20B has to be 600 feet or more in length. It has to encompass both sides of the street. Now, the advantage of that, when you get into that range, is that what Edison does is it charges the customer an undergrounding fee minus an overhead equivalent fee. Now, traditionally, and it's always been the case, an underground system is significantly more than an overhead system because you have to include all the trenching costs and all these things, and those types of things we take into our system. Rule of thumb, every project's different, but it's typically 25 to 30% of an underground cost. So for easy math, if an underground system costs $300,000 to do, and the equivalent overhead system to build the exact same type of system on an overhead pole line cost $100,000, we would assess the customer the difference, which is $200,000. Now, that's something that we do internally. We'll just give you a final bill. The other advantage of a 20B is that we remove the existing overhead facilities at our cost. So you get two primary advantages to that. Was that your question?
So.
Well, so basically...
My question didn't have to do with that degree of detail, but I appreciate it.
Well, so the estimate that we give the city does not go into that much detail. All that we tell the city is that we need to assess the district X amount of dollars.
Yeah.
So that's what we've given them, and the estimates that he's sharing with you does include that cost, that preliminary cost.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I want to thank you again for coming out. And again, I do apologize for the delay, primarily caused due to the T-fire, Hizasita fire response by both the city and the utility companies. And we have been waiting on the utility companies for their final design, which we now have. That's the good news. The tough news is that we've had this whammy on the assessment district information, but we'll try and sort that out as soon as feasible and possible, and we will be letting you know when the next meeting will be, and hopefully in the near future. Thank you for attending.